Story 1. Mothman. Perhaps you remember it. Perhaps you don't. Either way, it doesn't matter. After all, I do. In the winter of 2011-12, there was a string of people who disappeared without a trace on Newfoundland Island. They all lived in remote groups of about 20 people, barely qualifying as villages. They had all gone outside in blizzards, and everyone believed they had wandered off into a whiteout and got lost in the storm. None of their bodies had ever been found, and the fact that more than 2 feet of snow had fallen on top of the bodies didn't help anyway on to the portion of the story that involves me specifically. I lived in a small community of about 37 people. One of the missing peoples was a member of our small hamlet. It was in one of the worst storms of that January, and despite our warnings, the man in question pushed past us like a man possessed, screaming something about the need for food and needing to go up. All save 5 of us never saw that man again. They were the lucky ones. By the 3rd day after he had left, it was light enough and clear enough for us to go outside. We were in the middle of a valley surrounded by 2 high ridges, and the snow was about 4 feet high when we went outside. However, when we cleared away most of the snow from the single road going through the town, we saw that the snow was only that deep in the middle of the valley, and it was manageable on the mountains. Given his previous statements, we also thought that this was a reasonable place to bivouac, and looking, 5 of us returned to our respective homes to get mountaineering equipment and weapons. As we left the comparative safety of the village, we climbed up the mountain and were approaching the peak, when suddenly something leapt out of nowhere onto one of the members of our troop. I pulled the .358 Magnum revolver from the holster I had strapped to my side and shot the creature. From the back of my companion, the bullet went straight between the eyes of the bastard, and could see that it was a Wolf. The dead creature fell limply of the man as he stood up, shaking the snow off himself. I could hear the gunshot echoing between the walls of the valley. I knew I had made a mistake as soon as the corpse fell off him. There were waves of snow traveling at unbelievable speeds down the mountains towards us. The noise of the wall of snow falling was deafening, and I yelled to all to brace for impact. I saw 2 of us swept away by the snow, and I hunkered down as I experienced a limbo like nothing anyone who has not been in that position could know. I had to keep my eyes shut as tight as I could, and the moments when I did open my eyes, all I could see was a blank white nothingness. I could hear nothing because my ears were filled with snow, and eventually I realized that the movement had ceased. I knew what I had to do in these circumstances, and I released my bladder and felt it move towards my feet. I breathed a silent thank you that it hadn't been the other way around. I heaved my hands around to my head and started to slowly dig upwards. Progress was slow, but I eventually clambered out of a small hole as the thick snow caved in behind me. "Hello," I yelled, despairing. Suddenly I noticed a flash of bright orange down the mountain about 500 yards away. It was Teller, a man from New York who had come and lived in the village for about 2 months. I didn't know much about him, but I liked him nonetheless, as he was wearing a high-visibility coat, and I was glad of it. He was waving and yelling, and I saw the avalanche rumbling on behind him. I put on the snowshoes and walked briskly towards him. I pulled him out of the snow and helped him put his snowshoes on. We decided to walk together on the same kind of level, looking for the other members of the group. Firstly, we found the body of one of the group. His airways were full of snow, and we decided he had suffocated. Nasty way to go, commented Teller, but I've seen worse. How so? I asked him. I served in Vietnam, a medic, you understand. I was about to tell him I did, when I saw something that caught my eye. There was a person lying on his side about 300 meters above us. I started up the mountain, Teller following me. It was Jax. On the fourth member of the group, he was unconscious, but alive, and we sat there wasting precious time as we waited for Jackson to wake up. Suddenly he started coughing, and lumps of snow came up, along with a small amount of blood. We trekked on for about another half an hour looking for the two missing people we were looking for. It was getting dark, and there was the sound of wolves baying for our blood, so we started down the mountain. It was discouraging, to say the least, having lost 2 members of our party and not having found the first missing person. That last point was about to change. The sun was setting behind the crest of the ridge when suddenly I saw a red tinge on the surface of the snow. I pointed it out to Jackson and Teller, and we started digging down. In through the snow, we only had to dig about 2 inches before we saw the lifeless, frozen face of Farmer, the original missing person. He was almost as white as the snow he lay on. It wasn't as if he was just cold. It was more as if he had had the color sucked out of him. We excavated the rest of him from the icy robes that surrounded him and discovered the gruesome fact of his death. His chest had been ripped open with inhuman strength, and his heart, which was clearly visible, was intact save for a single hole punch straight into the middle of the organ. When we inspected the other wounds, such as the ones on his hands, defense wounds, Teller said, they appeared to have been made with claws, and they were absolutely devoid of liquid blood. We knew that this couldn't have been done by any non-intelligent being. The wound on the heart, and the fact that when the chest was ripped open there was no damage made to the heart, confirmed this, but the wounds on the arms and the act of the sucking of blood from the heart seemed to deny that this was human. We were right. We knew that we couldn't take a body with us, and it was approaching complete darkness. We all had mag lights with us, and we also had weapons, with USA 12-16 shotgun, an M15 rifle, and my .358 Magnum. But we could see that whatever had killed Farmer, he had to take the flight option. We left Farmer's body. Skiing, we had chosen to change from snowshoes to skis after the light started to go. We were now in the shadow of the opposing mountain wall, and we had to switch from your heavy, handheld mag lights to smaller, less powerful LED headlamps. It was a horrific experience, and we could all feel the eyes of some all-seeing, malignant presence watching over us. Jackson wasn't looking where he was skiing, and he suddenly went over, tripping on a rock that was on the top of the snow somehow, almost as if it had been placed there as the light of his headlamps woo. Round, I caught sight of a creature. It leapt on Jackson, clawing at the arms he had put in front of himself. It reached towards his chest and caught hold of both of Jackson's shoulders, and, using a dexterous claw on its foot, not unlike that of a velociraptor, we watched in palpable horror as the beast used this to slit open the flesh in the middle of the chest and the sternum with immense bestial strength and a roar of animal rage. He thrust his hand inside the wound and pulled them away from each other, creating an explosion, blood, and leant forward towards Jackson's still beating heart. I should probably back up for a moment and describe the creature. It was about 7 foot tall and had light gray skin stretched taut over its bones and muscles. Its eyes reflected red light, and it had claws on its hands and feet. The claws on its hands were of a significantly smaller size than the talons of its feet, presumably to help maneuverability. But there are two things that made it even more frightening. Its mouth was like a rotting hole on his face, ragged at the edges, with a needle-sharp proboscis which was revealed when one flap of ragged flesh was raised up. I have left, however, the most extraordinary feature until last. On his back he had 2 large wings, each bigger than me. They were like butterfly wings, but more drab, like a moth's. Anyway, back to the story. Jackson was still screaming, and the proboscis of that wretched bastard was still approaching the heart. Time seemed to slow down as I thought back about the missing peoples. I realized that the creature was responsible for the disappearance and death of them all. They had disappeared every 3 days, which had to be how often he had to heed, and that was when I knew what I had to do if we were to have any chance of success against it. I reached for the holster strap to my leg and lined up the sights on the .358 Magnum. I pulled the trigger on the revolver. I shot Jackson in the heart. It screamed out and leapt at me. I shot off the remaining 4 rounds of the Magnum. One of them must have hit his stomach or something, as gallons of human blood spilt forth from the wound. The other 3 wounds oozed a translucent blue liquid. It tried to take off, but Teller shredded one of its wings with a couple of slugs from He 12-16. I ran to Jackson, tossing away my Magnum and instead picking up the M15 rifle from beside Jackson. The beast, though injured, screamed with the last roar and rushed Teller. I shot the beast in he back, and a fountain of blue spattered Teller's face. It fell over, and Teller stood up, looked down the barrel of the 12-16, and shattered the skull of the beast. We looked at each other, shook our heads, and, in silence, walked back down the hill towards the village. The next day we went back to where the bodies of all 4 people had been. We found them all but the body of the moth. And I had searched the web for similar creatures had disappeared. His blood was still there, and we sent samples of that to labs. After the burials of the dead I moved. Teller had a job offer as a surgeon in Point Pleasant, and I decided to move with him. After all, I had no family there, and I wanted a fresh start. Besides, Teller was my only real friend, and the only one who would believe my story. But this was not the end. I figure that it has a level of telepathic power which it used to make the victims come to him, and he had a family. I think as he was DNG, he sent an image of me and Teller to his family, and I think they want revenge. But for now they are happy just watching and waiting for the opportune moment. Story 2. Eugene's Yacht. I've been watching Eugene constantly for about a year now, and if I've learned anything in that time at all, it's that my future plans wouldn't be easy. Eugene was a smart, devious man. He always seemed to know what was going on, what he needed to do and who he needed to take care of. His constant goal was simple: be at the top and kick anyone down who tries to climb there. Way up, he was respected by his allies and, more importantly, feared by his oppressors. He did, like all the greater men today, have a weakness. You see, my observations of him weren't just restricted to my daily office environment, where he and I both conveniently work at. I watched him drive his luxurious Mercedes back from work most days. I watched him walk out of the most prestigious nightclubs and deep party houses. I watch him take rides along the bay in his prized multimillion-dollar yacht, which is considered to be his trademark investment. However, I watched him become successful from the beginning, or at least become rich. He was part of a well-known, high-class family that had a history of business, talent, and, of course, crime. He wasn't always at the STT he is now. While he did live a spoiled and comfortable childhood, he lived life almost like I have. He was an average man working in the same office I did. However, I never was fond of him even before he became what many call king of the city. He was arrogant, always thought himself above others. He didn't care about your achievements or future plans, and he would always push you to if you so much as stepped in the way of his. Once his father and mother died in an accident involving a helicopter crash. He was believed to be unstoppable in most eyes. He was still arrogant, however, and I would use this to my advantage. I have a reason for my hatred towards him. You see, my wife was a detective for the Vancouver Police Department. Dangerous work, no doubt, but can be a death wish if you get involved in Eugene's plans. When Eugene's parents died in the helicopter crash, everyone expected he was involved in some way, but there was dire CT proof of it. And like everyone else, my wife, who happened to have seen Eugene suspiciously walking away from the helicopter before takeoff, decided to try to expose Eugene's actions. I warned her not to do it, but she saw it as an opportunity for recognition and reward. The only award she received was a cut to the throat. I know it was either the action of Eugene or someone hired by him. I can only hope that her death was quick, that she wasn't tormented by his hands. I've had nightmares that have plagued my mind that have convinced myself otherwise. Let's just say that they have made me a different man. It was at this moment that I snapped. My dislike of Eugene had turned into an inferno of vengeance that the ocean itself couldn't expel. I'd be eager to watch him any moment I could. Many times at the office, I found it difficult to sometimes restrain my anger and my thoughts to impale his eye with a pen. I knew, however, that the only Washington why I could hope to achieve my revenge would be in a way of stealth, of subtleness. I needed to exploit one of Eugene's few weaknesses, be there when he slips, and cease to make him breath. That could I do, though I was only a simple 27-year-old average man working in an above-average office space. What skills did I have in murder? Could I just wait until Eugene stumbles into a dark hall? No, he always has bodyguards when walking the streets. Could I raid his high-class estate and get him in his sleep? No, his security is probably top-notch. Could I sink his multi-million-dollar yacht to the bottom of the coastline while he's on his weekend sail? Wait, I could. Never has I thought of the idea until that moment. but I actually could. He liked to have so emmy space when he sails. He liked to take some time away from the popularity, the security, and the pressure of all his opponents. He takes this time away in the form of his yacht trips. I know, I've and him do it many times, all in the same way. He would board the boat, usually with a woman, sometimes to sail out to the coast, far out to the point where he can hardly be seen from the shore, and then stay away for the rest of the days until the weekend is over. The more I thought about these truths, the more I thought the plan was possible. And the more I thought it possible, the more I began to laugh along with this. What I found the most strange, however, was how I heard a faint voice in my head laughing with me. I couldn't make it out at first, but looking back at it, it sounded very similar to my wife's laugh. If my wife was an eager psychopath about to start a massacre in the downtown streets, was I going insane with my plan? Perhaps. But and again, I could already be insane before I thought the idea the way I'm going right now. However, I don't see that too much of a problem. Well, back on topic. So I evolved my sudden flicker of an idea into a bright, glowing, and functioning plan. The talk of the building, which I always listened to, was that Eugene was going to take a slightly extended voyage on his yacht at the end of the month, starting May 23rd and returning the 27th. The day that began the plan was the 20th. Considering the materials and planning required of this plan, I had very limited time. What did I need to do, though I could just as easily sneak on his mostly unguarded yacht where Eugene ironically believes he most safe, and kill him quickly with a simple kitchen knife or cheap Saturday night spare. No, it can't be that simple. I don't want him to just die in a quick moment of pain and demise. I want him to suffer, to fear every moment of his impending doom, and then perish in a way he would never expect coming, sinking his yacht, along with his treasures on board, his few guards, and all his successful history on that trip is a perfect way to do so. With the few days I had, I examined the boat at the marina. I made sure I hastily logged and mapped every opening and point of the boat, every door, every balcony, every ladder, every window. No pot was spared. I made appointments with some of the street dealers and obtained cheap, homemade but effective explosives. I also bought a knife and a silence point for 5 just in case I need to get why hands a little dirty with a guard. I don't plan to, though I don't want to kill until the moment is right. As a final part of the planning, I listened in on some of Eugene's phone calls and conversations to know exactly who will be on the yacht at the right time the night of the departure. I ran the numbers of final time. 1 rich bastard, 1 woman. For guards, 2 butlers, 1 boat pilot, 1 angered and possibly crazed assailant, and hopefully by the end, 1 capsized yacht. It was time to put the plan to action. It was the 23rd, 10 o'clock at night. I had set the explosives under the boat the night before. Eugene always preferred to depart in the late evening, possibly to enjoy some nightlife before departing. As he boarded his boat, I laughed quietly but confidently. Eugene had walked obliviously onto an explosive-riddled yacht, which would begin to sink rapidly at the push of a button. I made sure I laughed secretly because he was also unaware that I was inside the yacht's lifeboat. He, of course, didn't suspect this, as his arrogance and confidence in his yacht trips always makes his brilliant side blind once the boat as about a mile offshore, I began my work. I sneaked my way into the pilot's control room. I slithered behind the pilot, and, like a rogue, Train smashed his head into the control wheel. His dazed body fell to the floor as the control of the yacht rested in my vengeful, shaking hands. I set the vessel to constantly travel north, out to sea until the rest of my plan would be accomplished. I then waited until Eugene called down everyone for a late dinner break. The few people on the yacht would gather in the dining room, drink, and have a good time before the guards and NTs returned to their posts, all except for the pilot, who was required to stay at control until the guards secured the area again. When everyone was present in the room, I barred all the doors that led to freedom. I didn't need to worry about the windows, as all were closed, and Eugene had them bulletproofed years ago. Feeling the need for at least some security, I fled to the lifeboat. All my stamina. There was no more need for stealth, just haste. Once I dived to the small boat, lowered to the water, and got myself around 20 feet away. I took a few deep breaths and pushed the detonator for the explosives. A loud force from underneath the surface could be heard, and then large amounts of bubbles began to excrete around the edge of the boat. I heard a few startled screams at first, then silence, and then screams of turmoil and fear as the boat began to become consumed by water. The passengers screamed as yacht dragged down into the water, as if it was a damn soul being forcefully taken to hell. They tried to break the windows, but continued to panic as Eugene's poor planning said otherwise. In one of the yacht's last moments, Eugene looked out of one of the last surfaced windows, and he spotted me. He and I exchanged hateful glares for a quick moment. The look I witnessed in his face was brief, but it's one I will remember for the remainder of my life. It was a look of recognition, of remembrance, of regret, but most of all, it asked a question. How the hell did a man like this get the best of me? Perhaps he found the answer to that question in the little time he had left. Eugene, along with everyone else on that boat, was never found. Neither was the yacht, for that matter. I had made preparations to be sure it wouldn't be recovered because of the remoteness of the boat and the depth of the coastline. It was remained suspected that Eugene's yacht was lost at sea during a storm. Actually happened the day after my actions. I suppose that was lucky on my part. Sitting here in my apartment now, thinking about the event, I can't help but think of the life I destroyed. I took a life with great potential, a life that had many turns, many moments of struggle, and moments of success and victory. Eugene could have even gone to the status of president. If he had put the effort in, he was feared, respected, and in some cases, loved. The more I think about it, the more it begins to make me laugh. The more I laugh, the more I hear the faint voice of my wife begin laugh with me. Story 3. Time heals all wounds. It's that kind of evening, the foggy, humid winter evening. It's the kind where everyone else curls up in their blankets next to the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate, or gathers around the table, laughing and joking with glasses of mimosa, except for me. This evening, For some reason, I need to be alone. The only sounds I hear are my own footsteps plodding slowly, one after the other, through the slushy mixture of snow and mud, as well as the constant, irregular pitter-patter of water droplets falling from the tree branches. Other than that, the air seems utterly still, silent, and dismally cold. I try to make believe that I'm really out in the middle of nowhere. After all, everything is very peaceful here, and if I focus hard enough, I can actually imagine that the nearest shred of civilization is hundreds of miles away. All I can see are the dark, looming silhouettes of the barren trees against a gray overcast sky. This weather is normal for a December evening, and yet somehow there's something special about it today. It seems to draw me in, welcome me, comfort me, almost as though I am an old friend. My mind begins to wander after a while, pondering this empty, somewhat dejected feeling I've been having all day. This isn't the first day either. I've been feeling that way pretty consistently as of late. But the strange thing is, I can't quite figure out why. Is it just a seasonal thing? Could the cold weather be affecting my mood? Could this be what I think it might be? Or is it all just in my head? My mind travels back home for a second, stopping to consider those kids back in high school who used their mouths, their iPhones, their fancy laptops, and their outfits of retina-damaging colors to tell the world that their lives were Shakespearean tragedies in the making. Maybe I'm just like them, I think, kidding myself, desperate for attention. But then again, I never felt the need to flat-iron my hair or wear skinny purple jeans. After meandering on to the subject of the little cousin I miss so dearly, and finally to the little brother I sometimes wish I had, my mind drifts gently back to the present, and when it does, it notices something rather peculiar. I found myself standing near the edge of a rather large lake. In the distance, through somewhat thick layers of fog, I can make out the opposite shoreline, covered densely with barren, lifeless woods. Directly in front of me, a small piece of wet, muddy land extends outward into a small peninsula. On the very end of the peninsula, overlooking the lake, stands a single, gnarled, dead tree, its limbs drooping woefully toward the icy water. It strikes me as a monument of sort, as a commemoration placed there by nature to honor something tragic, sad, eerie. Slowly a new feeling begins to seep into my skin. Quite unlike the cold or the humidity, this place definitely has a dark, desolate aura, and yes, somehow, there is also a sense of mystery to it. More and more I can imagine that something important happened here that has long since been forgotten about. For a long time I stand there, allowing the right half of my brain to amuse itself once again. What could have happened here? What is the meaning of all this? It's all very gloomy, dark, cold, sad, and somehow it all seems vaguely. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. His eyes snapped open. He lay there, shivering, a growing sense of panic overtaking him. He had no idea where he was. He tried standing up, only to feel a pain unlike anything he had ever experienced in his 10 years of life shoot through his ankle. He had to bite down on his arm to muffle the shrieking bawl of agony escaping his mouth. He landed hard on the frozen ground, tears streaming down his face, fighting fiercely to stay in control of his mind. After what felt like hours, he finally won the battle, and managed to steady himself. He focused his mind, trying as hard as he could to remember what had happened. He vaguely remembered being chased out of his own home in panic, but that could have just been a dream. Then an image arose in his mind, one that caused him to shiver even more, the man in the mask. He allowed himself to dissolve into tears once more out of sheer terror of that image. He hoped he would ever forget about it. After pulling himself together again, he did the one sensible thing any 10-year-old would do. Mom, Dad, no answer. Slowly, grimacing against the immense pain, robbing through his foot, he managed to ease himself up onto his knees. Then, red-faced, shaking, and sniffing, he made his way up through the trees, his green eyes dashing around desperately in search of life. It was not long before his frantic gaze fell upon something that made his entire mind freeze over. No, it couldn't be. It just couldn't be. He had come to a point where the ground dropped down to form a small valley between two hills. At the bottom of the valley were layers upon layers of shimmering snow, stained with what was unmistakably blood. Trembling with horror, the boy followed the scarlet trail with his eyes, and had to shove his fist into his mouth to keep from screaming. At the end of the trail sat blood-drenched garbage bags, inside of which lay a man and a woman. Sobbing, the boy inched forward until he could reach the bags, and then began untying the first one with trembling fingers. "It's not real," he pleaded to himself. "They were only asleep, like I was. Please, don't be real. Just don't be real." Eventually, he was able to work the knot out of the bag. He paused, hardly daring to touch her, but he had to. Now he couldn't go on without knowing. Taking deep, steady breaths, he grabbed the woman by the shoulders, and with all the strength he could muster, turned her over. It was worse than anything he had ever seen. Blood oozed from every orifice in her once beautiful body. Her lower jaw sat mangled on her chest, still connected by a few pieces of flesh, muscle, and ligaments, leaving her tongue to dangle lazily down to her throat. It was a few moments before the boy realized that the shriek of horror he heard was his own. The world swayed in front of him, and he vomited on the ground next to him. He closed his eyes tight, and willing to look back into the contorted, eyeless face of his mother. At this point, he no longer cared about pain. He wanted to get as far away from this nightmare. As quickly as possible, he hobbled up and began running. Every other step was the equivalent of torture, but he didn't care. He had to keep running. His sanity depended on it. He ran for what could have been several days before his ankle finally gave way with a sickening lurch of pain, and the boy collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and freezing cold through all of his mental anguish. He noticed that he had come upon a clearing in the trees. Through the fog, he could make out a single dead tree, and beyond it, a large, frozen lake. He had no idea what to do next. He could no longer run, much less move. He decided his only hope was to scream for help and keep screaming, hoping that someone might hear. "Is anyone here? Please help me." It wasn't until he had shouted it that he realized the possibly fatal mistake he had just made. A new idea crept into his head, a terrifying idea, and a very real idea. He's still out here somewhere. The moment that thought crossed his mind, he heard it. Footsteps marching his way. The boy buried his face into his arms. He couldn't watch. This is it, he thought. This is the end. It's okay. Though, he thought to himself as tears once more trickled down his face, I'll be playing with Mom and Dad soon. They'll be waiting for me. But will it hurt to die? I hope he makes it quick. The footsteps passed him by. The boy could hardly believe it. Gathering up as much courage as he could, he pulled his face out of his arms and looked up. Someone was standing there near the dead tree, staring out at the lake. He had a long mane of light brown hair. The boy instantly felt so much relief, excitement, and gratitude that he almost fainted. But he could not afford to. He had to make his PR. Essence known. Help me. Please, he stammered. The older boy paid no attention. He simply stood there, taking in his surroundings with a somber look on his face. I know, please. Why, you've got to help me. Seriously, still no reply. In desperation, the young boy began to pull himself forward, using only his hands. As painful as it was, he knew that this would be the last stretch. If he could just make it to where the older boy stood, he would be okay. He would survive. I'm hurt. I'm bleeding, he shrieked. Please, he reached it out with his last bit of energy and grabbed the older boy's foot. The older boy blinked, then looked down. The young boy saw a hint of surprise in his shocking, terribly familiar green eyes. For a moment they remained there, staring into each other's eyes. Then the older boy looked skyward, took a deep breath, turned around, and began to leave. No, please come back. The young boy was sobbing. Again, this time in a fit of hopeless despair. He had never felt so alone, defenseless, or scared. The leafless trees seemed to taunt him in their silence, exuding a sort of stoic apathy to his suffering. He wished he could talk to the trees, plead with them, ask them for help, but he knew it was useless. There was nobody. The world was deaf to his cries. He was utterly alone. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Familiar. A light breeze begins to blow, shaking me out of my reverie. I notice the temperature has dropped significantly. I look up, shaking the long mane of hair out of my face. Thicker clouds are moving in. I expect it'll be tap. Something just touched my foot. I know I felt it. I looked down, scanning the ground with my eyes, searching for what might have. Tap. This one hit my shoulder. Look upward only to get hit dead center by a freezing cold drop of water. At this point, there are little taps falling everywhere, faster and faster. I should probably go back home now, I think. I wipe my face with my sleeve and turn around to go. I only somewhat take note of the fact that my ankle's been acting up again. For a moment, I remarked to myself how interesting and wonderful the mind must be to come up with such odd fancies. The weather having feelings, me depressed and alone. Come on now. Clearly, it's all in my head. I'm in college now. I've me lots of smart, friendly people, and I haven't felt alone like that since high school. It must be the cold climate making me moodier than usual. And one thing's for sure, I've definitely never seen this place before. I would have remembered it in a heartbeat. I check my watch and pick up my pace. My stepmom's having friends over for dinner tonight. Sort of a pre-Christmas get-together. I think I should probably be home before they arrive. Story 4. Vermins. There's always something inherently eerie about living in the forest and complete isolation. You almost always assume the worst when you're on your own surrounded by the thickly wooded area. It's almost like time doesn't pass the same as it would anywhere else. Like the edge of the woods was a portal capable of transferring you to the unknown the moment you placed your feet on the soft dirt, as if the vegetation is closing in on you the further you get from civilization. It's not an ideal situation for most us. Oh, you can imagine my feelings when I had to move into one. Allow me to explain, because you'll need some backstory to understand the depth of what I'm going to say. You can call me Jed. I've grown up in a city, and that's where I had stayed for almost my whole existence. I lived on my own in an apartment, but that's where this whole thing started. It was getting more challenging every passing month to pay rent, and that was in an apartment in the rougher parts of the area. My wasn't where it probably should have been, so I really couldn't manage to get a home in the city at all. I finally had to settle on a small trailer in the woods. It was about 4 hours away from my old place, with my sister begrudgingly agreeing to help me move out. I didn't have many belongings. Oh, it proved to be a generally easy task. The moment I bade farewell to my older sister and she drove away, I closed the door. That moment I realized I was really on my own. I don't care to admit it, but being around people gave me an odd sense of comfort. That was something I didn't have anymore. But I vaguely remembered seeing a house not too far from here, so I figured maybe I should say hello so I can have at least a tiny bit of company. I knocked on the door, and an old man came to open it. I introduced myself, and he almost immediately invited me in for coffee. He was glad to have some company, which I could understand due to the location. I came to know him as Otis. He owned land here and in the field out behind his house and used it for farming. The only people he spoke to were those who would command by his produce, and it was all business talk. I watched my drink cool while he told me about the area. He'd been living here a long time. We were making small talk when, seemingly out of nowhere, he looked me dead in the eye until I stopped talking. As soon as my mouth shut, he asked me if I was new to these parts. When I responded with a simple yes, he told me I needed to watch out for the vermins, which confused me. I expected small animals to be a given, but the way he said it made it sound off. I asked him what he meant. He sighed and settled in his chair. From what he told me, these weren't your typical vermins. He said it was imperative that I not let them fool me. I was puzzled, but I didn't want to be rude, and he was the only neighbor I had, so I brushed off the creatures he described as unusually ugly animals that he might have run into. Besides, he was old, and he seemed to enjoy my company, so he was probably looking out for me since I didn't have lots of experience with animals aside from pigeons and the occasional raccoon. A few weeks went by, each being more uneventful than the last. Visits with Otis aside, I was becoming close friends with him, and I spent time with him often, despite the weird vermin comments now. And then he was a nice guy. He told me stories of his late wife and of his children, who have long since moved out to attend school. I help him out on his farm sometimes, which I can tell he appreciates due to his having some trouble because of his age. Sometimes we would sit inside and watch his black and white TV, and occasionally we'd eat dinner together. It comforted me knowing I wasn't entirely on my own like I initially thought. When I returned though it felt painfully lonesome, I mindlessly flipped the TV on as I sat on the couch, a habit I had started not long after the move. It helped somewhat to ease the feelings of isolation, but I'd take what I could since I couldn't simply go to Otis's house all the time. The rain followed soon after. I was half asleep, barely paying attention to the program that was showing, listening to the peaceful patter of rain on the window pane. When I was about to get up and move to my room, I felt that something was wrong. The formerly consistent sounds of rain had become sporadic, and I crept to the kitchen to grab a snack on the way to the bedroom. It hit me. There wasn't any noise coming from the kitchen window. It wasn't raining anymore. I froze. The pitter-patter of what I imagined was rain could be faintly heard if I listened carefully. I had to see what it was. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't discover what was out there. With every step I took, my feet felt heavier. I cringed at the drawn-out creaking of the shoddy flooring. The television's blue light illuminated part of the room, and just enough so I could see a few feet out the window. I flinched when a light suddenly turned on, temporarily blinding me. The motion sensor. The sight of fingers pressed up against the glass caused me to jump back, frantically studying whoever or whatever they belonged to. The face I saw. I'm not even sure I can describe it today. I don't trust my memory. I thought it was a person, but it just couldn't have been. And no, all I saw was its smile, emotionless, unnaturally wide smirk. My attention was drawn immediately to its teeth, its tusk-like fangs, dripping with some unknown substance, stuck out like a sore thumb from its ray. She. I think it was a she. I wasn't going to stick around and study her any longer. However, to confirm, I fumbled around and made my way to my room. As fast as my legs could carry me, my heart practically leapt out of my chest as I locked the door. My windows, doors, and even the shed have remained locked tight since then. My shed lock was more of a rope, but no one was trying to steal gardening supplies. That wasn't a safety concern, so I didn't waste much time on it. When I awoke, the sun shone through the blinds, painting my SK, and with stripes of morning light I sat up in bed, looking at the TV, which was now displaying nothing but static. I went to turn it off on the way to the kitchen for a coffee or 6. Considering the night tea had, I racked my brain for any more details I could recollect. Her clothes had been soiled and torn, caked in dirt and God knows what else. Her disheveled hair flared up in all directions. It was easy to see her hair was red, as it stood out almost as much as those damn teeth. What was the worst, though, is that a word went through my mind the whole time I thought about her. Fake. She didn't look like an actual person. The way her body contorted, her facial expression, it wasn't possible. She was a poor facsimile of a human being. I had to warn Otis. I hopped in my car, but I took a moment to glance at the backyard. The shed doors were open. I didn't have time to investigate. Otis needed to know. I practically jumped out of my car when I pulled up to his driveway, knocking much more desperately than usually. He had to answer. His truck was in the garage. When no one came to the door, I opened it reluctantly. The sight before me made me regret everything I'd done up until that point. Otis. He was sprawled motionless on the carpet, a look of hopelessness in his eyes. It all happened so fast. There was a gash in his chest which extended down to his pelvis, and approximately half of his extremities were missing. My eyes brimmed with terrors as I leaned over his remains. Whoever did this, whatever did this, had no plan. It was a mess. All of the wounds were completely inconsistent. All I could do was glance around, noticing the broken bottles and tipped-over furniture littering the room, indicating a struggle I couldn't damn. A G noticed fighting, images of him sitting in a rocking chair, peacefully smoking a cigar, flashed in my head. I turned slowly to look in the direction of the doorway, and there she stood, clutching the frame with that permanent smirk plastered on her face. Crimson sloppily coated her mouth and face, trickling onto her clothing. She was holding my garden shears. She stared at me for what seemed an eternity, despite the smile. Her eyes betrayed fear, as if she was trying to express emotion, but her mouth refused to uncurl. I scrambled for the back door, grabbing a note-tab, book, and a pen from a counter as I made my escape, thinking that perhaps they would come in handy later. As I crossed the threshold of the trailer and darted into the outdoors, one word echoed in my mind over and over again, like a broken record. Fake, 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 fake. I had nowhere else to go but the cornfield. I ducked into the stalks, sprinting to safety. It was my only option. I tried to ignore the stinging of the plants around me and did my best to travel in one direction. That brings me to now. I'm lost in the woods, completely isolated, but I'm not sure which idea is scarier. Am I on my own, or is she following me? I'm not going to last much longer out here. Now, please listen. I want to tell you something a wise man once told me. The vermin's done. Look real. It is imperative that you not let them fool you. There are all sorts of possibilities for how I'll meet my end. I'll most likely either die from starvation or become sustenance for her. I feel sick every time I try to think of how long it will take for her to grow hungry again. One day, Otis won't be enough to satisfy her. Sometimes I think about how I just left him there for her to devour, spending a minimal amount of time mourning the loss of a dear friend. I'm making up for that time now. I'll be waiting among the bushes and the trees, helpless and staring up at the baby blue sky for hours, and in that time the clouds haven't moved. Something is wrong. When will the day she finds me finally arrive? I don't know. I've written this as a warning. NG to all of you. If you ever come across my body, let it be known the passing of time is strange out here. Story 5. Fast forward. Ad break. I hit the mute button and stand up from my comfy chair, stretching, and wander into the kitchen, eyeing the fridge, swinging the metallic doors open. I cast my eyes over the shelves. Cheese expired, milk expired, sauces and relishes probably expired to see. Either it is, I guess, walking a little awkwardly. My legs are still half asleep. Back through to the TV. I sit back down, opening the cider and taking a sip before setting it down on the table beside me, missing the coasters entirely, but not really caring. I returned halfway through an infomercial for ceramic knives. A youthful brunette woman stands into thirds of a kitchen, slicing up a chunk of raw meat dripping with blood. The set is dimly lit, the outline of cupboards and counters barely visible in the background, but she's standing in a spotlight, harsh shadow. WS highlighting a set of ceramic knives with shining black blades and dull silver handles. Sliding the chopping board to one side, she picks up a stack of paper. At first, it appears to be blank, but at second glance I notice it's a stack of documents of some kind. They don't look like the standard fare for an infomercial. If anything, they looked like bank statements. I've seen this kind of infomercial before, and usually they slice through the edge of the paper, chopping off one of the corners. However, this woman sliced clean through the middle of the paper at an odd angle, not quite diagonal from corner to corner, and shoves them back off camera a little angrily. Her fury builds as she pulls the meat back on screen, discarding the black-bladed chef's knife and pulling a cur of her from the block beside her. She hacks and chops viciously at the slab of what presumably used to be a cow, slowly beginning to smile. There's a glint of madness in her eyes, something frenzied about her movements as she picks up a vegetable knife with her free hand, shredding the meat with both knives at once. Slowly, her feeding frenzy dies down. Out of sheer curiosity, I reach for the remote, tapping the mute button. The woman talks about how the knives are sharper than steel and don't blunt as easily, how they don't shatter, and my mind wanders to the oh-so-familiar fact that I'm probably the only person on the planet who can't skip these things or at the very least fast forward them. Still, I guess I don't really mind. It gives me time to grab a drink, maybe go to the bathroom, all without missing anything. The infomercial ends and a commercial for women's clothing begins. Yawning, I go for the mute button again and make my way to the bathroom. Coming back, I catch the end of a commercial for hair dye and the entirety of one for makeup. A woman, also brunette, applies mascara in front of a mirror in a well-lit, almost harshly lit, close-UT. Her hands are shaking, and black goo drips from the brush across her slightly tear-stained face. The camera zooms out as her grip on the brush tightens, and a smile twists across her face. She hurls brush at a mirror, her still shaking hands snatching at lipstick, roughly applying it to her lips as a deranged smile plays across them. She appears to be saying something, and I take it off mute to discover she's talking in a distraught, high-pitched whisper, unintelligible apart from the occasional exclamation of "with her," and how could he end wordless exclamations of fury. The camera zooms out more, and she angrily sweeps several other cosmetic products off a counter in front of her, and they clatter into the sink, smashing bottles as skin-colored goo blends with powder and more mascara, dripping slowly and steadily into the sink as tears fall. Once again, the commercial ends, a logo half-heartedly flashing up on screen. I take a sip of my cider, the harsh apple flavor biting my tongue. As the show starts back up, I settle in for a while. About half an hour later, with little else to do, I switch over to the +1 channel. These things are handy. I guess that said I'm still in the minority that watches them, rather than recording a show or just watching it online. I reach the episode I was watching earlier, finishing the last of my cider as the next one starts, setting it back on the table. I knock the remote to the floor. It's still there later, when the adverts start up again halfway through, the same set as before, and this time I hear everything. A man, headed slowly but surely towards middle age, but still retaining some of his youthful looks, steps into an expensive-looking jeweler's. The camera shows a series of close-up pan-ing shots of gold and silver and bronze and all manner of gemstones resting on a mannequin's hand, set against a background of seemingly endless blue velvet. The voiceover gives the name of T.H. store, and the camera cuts back to the man from earlier walking out of the store, bag in hand, and finally to him standing behind a woman a few years older than he, lingering briefly on H. his hands as he wraps a necklace, silver-studded with emeralds, around the woman's slender neck. Her hands, smooth and free of any jewelry, brush against his ring-adorned fingers. Most of the rings I recognized from earlier in the commercial, but one, sitting at the base of his ring finger, didn't look familiar. It looked cheaper, nice, but not as nice as the rest, and much plainer, lower quality gold, perhaps, and adorned with no gemstones. Throughout all this, soft classical music plays. The scene fades to "Your beloved deserves the best. Your beloved deserves G. Simmons." I yawn, check the time, and then down the last of my cider. I feel like getting another one, but I feel like that infomercial should be back on soon. My suspicions were confirmed as the infomercial did, and it began anew, opening on a close-up of the knife set, their black ceramic blades shining from an off-camera spotlight, their silver handles still looking remarkably dull. Laid out on a counter, the CHEF's knife I'd seen earlier was missing, and there was a conspicuous empty space where it should have been between a smaller knife and a cleaver. The set was rounded out by a vegetable knife again, the one from earlier, and a peeler. The voiceover started up, a little skewed. It sounded like it was being read from a script by a woman, maybe 45 years old, clearly terrified, out of her wits. She raced through the name of the knives, the company, and introduced the presenter, no doubt the woman I'd seen earlier. There was the sound of meat being sliced into, abruptly silenced as the microphone was cut off. After a few minutes, the brunette stepped into the same two-thirds of a kitchen as before, wiping a ceramic chef's knife on her apron, blade up so as not to slice through the white fabric. I'm not sure whether I imagined it, but just before she stepped behind the counter, I swear an ugly red blotch was visible where the knife had been for the merest fraction of a second. Times like these, I wish I could pause. Ebon precision ceramic knives are among the toughest on the market. They can slice through steak after steak without losing their sharper-than-steel edge. She pulled a chopping board into shot. A huge chunk of meat, perhaps a leg, slowly dripping onto the sturdy wooden surface of the chopping board. She stabbed the knife into it, laughing faintly, eyes wide. Of course, this isn't steak. Oh no, this is chicken. At the last word, she tore the knife out, sticking it into the bloody chunk of meat again and again before regaining her composure. Of course, there's more. Our peelers are so sharp, they can't just slice up vegetables, she said, peeling a carrot and holding it in a way that to me feel a little uncomfortable. Oh no, you can skin meat with this. Here's a chunk of pig. She reached off camera again, pulling a dripping slice of pork, the pale skin still attached, into shot. She took the peeler to it with real gusto, thin blood seeping from the freshly ripped and shredded skin. See how cleanly it tears through everything, she proclaimed, lifting the freshly peeled meat off the blood-soaked chopping block and hurling it down. A smile flicked across her mask of anger as it hit the studio floor with a solid splat. She dragged the chicken, which was clearly red meat of some kind, back into shot, and see how our exquisite chef's knife chops and slices this cheating, pathetic chicken, she screeched, sliding it off camera again and bringing the document's eye into shot. See how it slices through these bank statements, the statements from our joint account, the account that Pig used to buy her a necklace, our joint account. She ranted, eyes gleaming with madness as she ran the shining black knife through the paper, growing slightly calm as she did so. She shoved the paper-covered chopping block off camera, scattering ripped-up bank sheets. She grew angry once more as she brought the red meat back into shot, discarding the chef's knife which stuck into the slab of pork on the floor with a sickly squelch, and pulling out the cleaver, she mumbles to herself as she hacks it up, unintelligible words punctuated with laughter and exclamations of how could he, and with that harpy and faint screams she pulled out the vegetable knife, hacking and tearing at the meat with renewed gleeful anger, until slowly her feeding frenzy dies down. Ebon precision knives are sharper than steel, and will never lose their edge. They're the finest quality knives on the market, the ideal choice for slicing, for chopping, for peeling, and for dealing with whatever may come your way. Her eyes glinted maliciously with these last few words. I wander through to the kitchen for a fresh bottle of cider, catching the end of a clothing commercial. A woman, looking slightly distraught, walks out of a cheap clothing store, her knuckles white as she tightly grips the dark blue handles of a bulging plastic bag, the logo turned to the camera. As the commercial for hair dye begins again, I'm disturbed from my morbid curiosity by a knock on the door. I open it a fraction to see a blonde-haired woman standing on my doorstep, silhouetted in the light from behind me against the bungalows across the street. Makeup starting to run down her face, eyes brimming over with tears. Her clothing looks cheap, although that may just be from the lighting. Glancing around at the unfriendly assortment of buildings that unfortunately comprise my neighborhood, she began to speak. "See, can I use your phone? Your lights were on, and in my car." She gestured to a vehicle parked a little way down the street, a black hatchback. It looked particularly old, but it had seen better days. Nodding, I opened the door to let her in. I live in a bad neighborhood. Lucky for her, she's found one of maybe 3 houses on the block who would be willing to help. I lead her to the phone, lifting the handset for her, and thinking I must be one of the last few people to own a rotary dial phone. And, Tourney, I feel it. Before I see it, before I can react, icy cold metal bites into my neck, and I stare down in horror to see a silver necklace, inlaid with emeralds and encrusted with blood that looked almost fresh, as if through a heavy fog. I heard the woman speak as sorry, but I can't afford to have any doubly witnesses. Story 6, Swimming Pool. Hunter ducked into the closet before Mrs. Abernathy could catch a glimpse of him. The blackness curled around him, and the clutter of age textbooks and outdated curriculums made the already small corridor even tighter. Go into the yoga room, enter the CL closet on the far side, and go down the hallway. He repeated the steps his friend Nate had told him. Light in hand, he crept towards the opposite side, He'd never felt so afraid. In school before, the castaway supplies of teaching eras bygone were surprisingly sinister in the dark. That isn't even to mention what would happen to him if he was caught. He was filming, but he wouldn't. He posted. All it would take was one snitch to safe to tell him, and he'd be dragged to Mr. Lockheed's office before he even left. He'd only show people in person. Legend would spread fast enough, and then there wouldn't be a way for administration to catch him. He was beginning to wonder if the whole thing was a hoax when he reached the end of the room, just as Nate said, a hole in the wall to his left. It was irregularity-shaped and led into a dirt tunnel just large enough for him to crouch in. He entered. Unsure of which way his destination was, he decided on a whim to take left. He traveled ahead, taking every turn, save for the occasional spider. He was alone. There was nothing all that creepy, really, but nevertheless his hands trembled, and he felt the tinges of panic. A voice in his ear told him to turn back, and even proof of the tunnels would give him enough clout. "I'm in too deep," he whispered to himself. The tunnel seemed not to end, and the darkness swallowed him as he went forward, his video light barely reaching 3 feet ahead. Eventually, however, he was greeted with another hole in the wall. But this one didn't lead to any closet. It led into what seemed to be a regular hallway, but dark, musty, and crumbling. He'd found it. Hopping into the hallway, he half expected some cryptid or psycho to leap out at him. To calm himself down, he started speaking to an audience as if he was vlogging. "Guys, look at this shit. I'm literally freaking right now. Check out these rusty-ass lockers. I must be the first dude down here in ages." He walked down the hallway and through the locker room, and finally stumbled into it. The abandoned pool, wanted as the dark secret of Mulberry High. Rumors of why the pool was closed and the new one he built floated across the school. Everything from a drowning incident to health hazards were cited. Most likely, the inefficiency of having the pool underground for classes and events, coupled with the outdated equipment, gave the opportune excuse to build the fancy new one they had now. That didn't stop these tales from spreading. More sinister were the rumors of what it was used for. Now, Mr. Lockheed's satanic sex dungeon, location of a secret experiment on kids, of course. It all sounded like comedic bullshit in the fluorescent light of the main level. Down in the oppressive black, it seemed like a very real possibility. He walked towards the edge of the pool. Splintered tile and cracked pipes lay in his path like guardians trying to turn him back as he carefully maneuvered closer. A drop of water hit his head, and he looked up. The ceiling was missing chunks, and whole pillars were collapsed. "Damn, guys, how's our school not sinking? There's no way that the entire science department is supported by this," he told the camera as he held it aloft, still taking small steps. As he remarked on the cracked light bulb overhead, his right foot and straight over the edge of the pool, and he went with it. He screamed as he fell, and his legs cracked underneath him as he landed. His phone shattered on impact. The pain shot up, and he yelled in agony. He had went right into the deep end, 8 feet as it were. He tried to stand, but his legs were useless. Reaching down, he felt the bone jutting from his left calf. He was in utter agony. He reached for his phone, but only found glass shards. Panic set in. There was no way out. He couldn't walk or even see. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, saving the surprise for after. No school administrator would know where to look. Teachers weren't even supposed to really talk about the place, and likely it wouldn't even cross their minds. Nobody had been down there for over 60 years, save for the rare maintenance that was done on the structure and piping. He began shouting for help like the dying animal he was. Primal instincts had kicked in and he screamed his lungs out. He wasn't even hoping that someone would hear him. His brain was so pumped with fear and adrenaline it was all he could feel, and he couldn't begin to think a coherent thought. For about an hour he lay in the dark, yelling. The pain in his legs kept him shaking and sweaty, and he was unbelievably cold. His mouth had lost all moisture, and the asbestos powder H. Ed inhaled wasn't helping. His throat was raw, and eventually he stopped, but his panic hadn't faded. In a fit of helplessness, he tried to claw up the rough wall of the pool. He tore at it with his hands, the pain of his skin being ripped from his fingers and his nails being torn out against the craggy concrete were undetectable compared to the wrenching in his legs. Giving out, he fell against the wall and wept. He cried, his sobs echoing in the chamber. He cursed himself for coming down there. However, he wasn't defeated yet. A rational mind, sick of being tormented by the torm his body was in, took over. He thought of his options, and he drafted a plan. If he could crawl to the ladder on the other side, pull himself up, and come out, he could crawl back to the tunnel. He could crawl through the tunnel, into the closet, and back into the yoga room. It would take quite a while and require great strength, but he was motivated by the fear of rotting down here. He was already dehydrated and had lost a decent amount of blood. He wasn't going to get any stronger. He slowly crawled his way away from the wall, using what little control he had left over his hips and legs to painfully help his arms. He wriggled up the incline towards the shallow, and eventually he reached the opposite wall. He remembered the ladder was on the left side, and with as much haste as he could muster, he followed the wall left. Finding the ladder, his fear evaporated into hope, and he grabbed the rungs with his scabbard fingers. He'd never been great at pull-ups, but THI's life-or-death situation gave him new strength. He was clasped onto the second-to-last rung, nearly free. He didn't give thought to the journey after. He was thinking one step at a time. The rusted bar gave way to his weight. Snapping, he fell backwards, landing hard on his back and rolling a ways down the pool. He was in far greater suffering now. The wind was knocked out of him, and his head throbbed. His hope was destroyed, and dread filled the void. He lay for some time, dizzy, miserable, and scared. He made no further attempt to move. He couldn't have if he wanted to. He played through scenarios where by miraculous circumstances someone else made it down here to distract himself from the reality. Maintenance workers, other explorers, even Mr. Lockheed, his dread calcified into a despair. He realized that this was the end. Face to face with death, he went through his life again, remembering his times as a little child where even the slightest danger was shed by his parents. He couldn't help but laugh a little, perhaps going slightly delirious. He began giggling as he went through some of his funniest experiences. This giddiness gave way to sadness as he thought about his parents in mourning. It was even worse thinking that for possibly a very long time they wouldn't even know where he went. making it much more terrible for them. He began drifting in and out of sleep, the darkness remaining constant. He dreamt little, and what he did dream he remembered not when he woke. As he came 2 hours later, fevered and clammy, he lay next to Nate. He was shocked to full consciousness. He knew this wasn't a dream, and he shouted at his friend, "Go into the yoga room, enter the closet on the far side, and go down the hallway," Nate said to him in anger. He attempted to strike his friend, but could barely move his arm. Nate's freckled face morphed into that of his father. "Damn it, son W. He don't have the money for you to make these kinds of mistakes." The apparition yelled at him. Hunter gritted his teeth and began crying once more. The vision morphed again and again into his best of friends and worst of enemies, and all of them spoke at him. He covered his ears in vain and begged for them to go away, until it morphed into Len. He stopped crying at once and stared into her blue eyes. She giggled at him and stroked his face. The girl that sent him into nervousness just by being in the same room was now touching him. The girl that he had liked for so long, and if he had just had the balls, would have got. They had texted regularly, but he couldn't bring himself to personal contact. But it was okay, because now she was with him. "Hey, Len, what's going on?" he asked the hallucination. "I've got myself in a sticky situation, as you can tell." He continued his phantom conversation with the girl he had obsessed over ever since high school stuff. As he talked, his body began to fail. Blood from his head and legs had taken quite a toll, and his body was struggling to keep its temperature up. The lack of water accelerated the process, and the internal bleeding had begun, taking his internal organs down. As he lay there, dying, she faded away. A final wave of utter desperation washed over him, and he screamed guttural cries of agony and panic. He clawed helplessly at the ground and flopped his body. Without rhyme or reason, he fell into unconsciousness for the last time and didn't die at peace. He fought for every second he lived in T.'s final moments with the strength only a wounded and primitive creature could, and the last thoughts to enter his mind were not of the afterlife nor his family, but of raw terror. ****. Pretty grisly. The officers found him half composed down there, legs snapped and skull cracked. From the blood trails it looks like he gave quite the fight, too. Yeah, administration sealed the area, and an Yon found trespassing is going to be expelled. They definitely don't want a repeat. Did you know him? I did. I think he liked me last year. I remembered we texted some, but he'd never actually talked to me. He seemed all right, but was always weird when I was around. Poor guy, wish I had gotten to know him. ****. Author's note. Many details are taken from real life. The RE is a tunnel system under my school you can get into from the yoga class, closet, and an abandoned pool underground. Story 7. Propane thump. The girl jerked away. She glanced at the window, afraid of what she would see, yet it revealed nothing but the dark night. They're back, she thought anxiously. A week ago, the girl awoke to find that somebody had spray-painted loops and scribbles of blue and red on their garage door. Mom thought it was a rival gang at first, maybe trying to intimidate the girl's brother's clan, but the girl wasn't so sure. She'd never seen gang graffiti lick. Usually it was only one color, and they'd write out just a letter and a number, like the X for she'd seen in a bathroom stall at school. If they used a lot of colors, it was to paint an eye, cake name and cool, bubbly letters, like the ones under the bridge on her walk home. This looked nothing like that graffiti. She had thought it was silly at the time, but the next morning, as Mom was leaving for work, she noticed something lying across the top of the driveway. It was a long wooden board with nails poking through it, sharp side up. It was a good thing Mom noticed, because it would have popped all her tires for sure. The girl was anxious about it, though nothing bad had happened. The events were strange, more than anything, but Mom said she'd ask her boyfriend to stay over the next nig HD to keep them safe. That made the girl feel little better, but something happened that night, too. The girl thought all those globs of white on his shiny BMW were just bird poop. It looked like a whole flock of giant birds had unloaded their intestinal burdens right on his car on purpose. And since the girl didn't like him much, it made her laugh. Mom's boyfriend got mad and cursed a lot, though, because the globs turned out to be paint remover. He'd have to get the whole car repainted. Somehow targeting a full-grown man like that made the girl more frightened than anything else. It didn't feel like teenage pranksters anymore, nor gang rivalry. At the present, she was worried she wouldn't be able to hear anything even if someone was right outside the door, because her heart was pounding so hard in her ears. She strained to listen for another sound anyway, and thump, thump. Her eyes darted to the source of the noise and realized it was coming. She from her brother's bedroom, which shared a wall with the living room. They're probably doing it. She cringed in discomfort. Her brother and his girlfriend were supposed to be watching her. She didn't really need a babysitter, but Mom's boyfriend didn't want to come over anymore. Mom had night classes and wouldn't let the girl stay here alone since someone kept messing with the house. Thump, thump, thump. The girl turned up the volume on the TV to drown them out. She'd fallen asleep watching Nickelodeon, but now an old show in black and white was on. She considered just going to bed, but her room was upstairs and the staircase was dark. The laughing and talking from the sitcom was comforting. She would just fall asleep on the couch, and Mom would put her in bed when she got home. By the time the episode ended, the thumping from her brother's room was long gone. Now he was playing his rap tapes, and even though she liked the music, and she'd even steal his Walkman when he was out of the house and listen to them, the deep, shuddering bass penetrated her heart at night and set her on edge. It would be less overwhelming if she went upstairs, so she resigned herself to brave the darkness and try to fall asleep in her bed. As she rose from the couch to turn off the television, she thought she glimpsed a flash of light from outside. She froze. A car, their house as set against a hill, so the living room windows looked out on mostly sky and treetops, not roads or sidewalks. It couldn't be a car. Lightning, but there hadn't been a cloud in the sky all day, just as she had convinced herself she had imagined it. The girl saw the light again. It was a flashlight. Someone was walking through the yard below their back deck, and the beam from their lamp flicked up through the trees as the figure stepped over larger logs and stumps. She could see the man by the dim light coming from the window at which she stood, and it was definitely a man with a big broad back and long legs stomping through the brush, edging closer and closer to the shed by their propane tank. When he stopped and set down the pack he was carrying, the girl jumped back and turned, running to her brother's room. She glanced at the splintered hole that he had kicked in the door and for a moment reconsidered, but someone was outside their house and she didn't know what else to do. The girl knocked, waited, knocked again, knocked louder, and finally she heard footsteps coming toward the closed door. Her brother threw it open, and a smelly wall of smoke hit her face. It wasn't like his room usually smelled. That weirdly sweet smell, like a skunk but not bad. This was more like when Mom cleaned the oven, or like a litter box or bought H at the same time. What do you want? There's someone outside. Shit, Mom's home? No, it's not Mom. I think it's like last time. The girl started to cry. Her brother was being stupid. His eyes were red, and his girlfriend was just lying there in his bed, doing nothing, when there was someone outside their house. She wished Mom were home. Someone's outside. Yes, that's what I'm trying to tell you. The girl sobbed. Her brother pulled on his red and black plaid jacket and clumsily pushed her aside. He strode to the living room window, the one looking out down the hill, and the girl followed. She could see the man down there, crouched over his pack, like he was trying to hide, as he pulled something out of his pack. Something long and shiny. It was a handsaw. The girl pressed her face to the glass to see better. Hey, I see you, motherfucker. I'm gonna call the fucking cops. Her brother shouted, his barely post-pubescent voice cracking on the last W. Or the man leapt up and dropped the saw. Before the girl's brother could shout anything else, the man was sprinting up the hill to Begonia Road, running at an angle to get away from their house. The girl's brother turned on his heel and burst out the front door just as the girl was starting to worry that her brother had found the man, and the man might hurt him. Her brother came back in the door, sweaty, pale, and out of breath. He's gone. Are you sure? Yeah. Do you think he'll come back? I don't fucking care. Now, all right, just go to bed. The girl went upstairs to her room, but she couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed until she saw the headlights in her window that announced Mom's return, then crept to the landing outside her room and listened to her brother tell Mom what had happened. Jesus, Mom sighed when she'd heard the story. Thank God you guys are okay. Yeah, who do you think? Don't look at me like that, Mom. It wasn't because of me. I didn't say it was. Joseph, I just don't know who else could be doing this, or why. What if it's some punks trying to scare you? He wasn't trying to scare us. He was trying to blow up the house. The house wouldn't have blown up. It would have caused a leak. That's all. Cost us a fortune to have it fixed and the tank refilled. Maybe the spark from the blade would have started a fire, but it wouldn't have blown us up. I'll check it out tomorrow. Maybe he didn't know that. He was trying to blow us up. They went quiet. The girl tiptoed to her bed and crawled under the covers so that when Mom came in and checked on her, she would have thought the girl was deeply asleep. But she didn't sleep at all that night. Mom said the tank was probably fine the next morning, but she could smell the propane and had called a professional to come and make sure there wasn't a leak. It was Saturday, so Mom made French toast for the girl and Joseph. Joseph's girlfriend was still sleeping, The phone rang. Mom lifted it from its mount on the wall and said hello. Her face went cold. The girl's dad must be on the other line. He asked how she was. The girl gasped because Mom said fine, but she said it in the high-pitched voice that betrayed her words. Mom never lied except when she said fine, and always in that tone. The girl's dad wanted to come over and borrow some tools from the shed. Mom didn't say anything about last night or the other nights. The girl knew Mom was afraid that he would use the information in court to make her seem like an unfit mother. He did that when the girl got lice from school and said that Mom's home wasn't clean enough. Mom's house was always clean. The girl's dad arrived in his big white Chevy truck soon after they finished breakfast, and he walked into the house like he lived there. He swooped the girl up onto his big, broad shoulders, and the girl wrinkled her nose at the odd smell on his thick john jacket that had mingled with its usual scent of sawdust and cigarettes. Mom gave him a cup of coffee, black. He talked about the garage door, said it was gang-related for Sue, and he shot Joseph a nasty look. I don't think so, Mike. I haven't seen any graffiti like that before. Well, I have, and I think you know what to do about it, Mike said, looking accusingly at Joseph again. Joseph got up and went to his room. Yeah, I do, said Mom. We repaint. Mike offered to help and said he'd be back tomorrow with a roller and a bucket of paint. But now he had to leave, so he went out the door and hiked down the trail to the shed. The girl went outside when he was back up at his truck to say goodbye. He was lifting a pack into the passenger seat, and she saw something shiny sticking through the open zipper. What's that? She asked. A saw. I'm helping someone with a project today. You don't have one of those? I did. I must have left it here the last time I visited. They locked eyes for a moment, and the girl tried not to let her thoughts show on her face. She wasn't sure what she thought anyway. She felt like she'd ID when she was taking a test at school, and she knew the answer to a question, but just couldn't pull it up in her memory. Her dad broke his gaze first, smirked, and climbed up into the truck. He didn't look at her again as he turned his truck around in the driveway and chugged up to Begonia Road, but that smell from his jacket lingered on the girl's pajamas, the distinct smell of propane.